Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Legal Eagle podcast. Happy New Year. I can't believe we're in the year 2024. It's been a 2-year hiatus for me. I've been offline for 2 years just because I've been busy running the firm and have lots of exciting, interesting cases. So I'm so happy to be back on the podcast with a new episode with the one and only Kim Lehal. So today, Kim and I will be discussing international child abduction. So hello, Kim. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you.
So Kim's currently in London yes?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Yes. So
And
I've recently moved firms 3 months ago, so I am based in London.
wow. And is it very cold at the moment in London?
Um, it's windy. We have the start of a storm by the looks of it.
Oh, no.
So it has been cold, but it is now milder, which is not unusual. It tends to get a bit mild towards Christmas, and then cold
Oh,
again.
wow. But I'm the opposite. I'm in a very sunny location at the moment. So I
I
kind
can
of
see
wish
that from how
I
sunny you are.
kind of yeah. So, for the listeners who don't know, Kim is a partner and head of international children at RWK Goodman. As mentioned, child abduction cases are one of her specializations. She's also the founding member of the Child Abduction Lawyers Association, an association aimed to formalize the network of child abduction lawyers and to maintain the high standards of service for child abduction matters. Wow, that's amazing. So, Kim, would you like to tell listeners something interesting about yourself?
Um, oh, um, I I am an accredited specialist in international child abduction law. But in addition to that, I also represent parents in forced marriage cases.
Mm,
I have a lot of experience in surrogacy arrangements.
wow.
I did quite a lot of work with India before surrogacy was banned. So in terms of my area of specialism, it's very much children. So anything that involves children, whether it's litigation about children, whether it's starting a family through surrogacy, adoption, I represent anyone who has an issue in relation to children.
Wow, that's fantastic. And Kim, when we were talking before, from our conversation, you mentioned that you actually started with child work right from the beginning of your career. And that's some real commitment, to be able to start your practice with child work. Can you share with listeners your journey in practice? How did you wind up in children's law and child abduction cases specifically?
Yes, of course. So when I started out, I entered law conventional route. I went to university, did my LPC. I was fortunate to get a training contract straight away. And during my training contract, I was supervised in family law by a partner who specialised in all aspects of family, but with a particular interest in children. So I was
Mm,
really fortunate that I started out learning all aspects of family law, whether that was divorce, financial matters on divorce, public law proceedings where the local authority were intervening, where children were at risk of significant harm in their parents' care, as well as private law children. So parents arguing over who the child's going to live with and
mm,
how contact the other parent was going to have. So I was exposed to all aspects of family law, which was great, but I was more drawn to children. Um,
mm.
and when I was very, very junior, when I was just starting out, I landed a case by chance where I was representing a mother and the father decided to abduct the child whilst he was having contact and not return the child.
Mm.
And as you can imagine, as I was very junior, I had the shock of my life because I thought, oh no, I didn't realise that parents abducted children.
Yeah.
Um, what do I do now? And at the
Mm.
time, my supervisor was so supportive. She was like, it's just a High Court application. We'll ring council. Council will tell us what we need to do. And we went from there. And I was in the High Court making application day after day after day. It
Wow.
was exciting. It was very exciting. It was daunting.
Mm.
Um, and we managed to find the child after making lots and lots of applications.
Wow.
And the child was found on a canal boat in the middle of nowhere in England.
Really?
Yes,
In
in England.
England. Oh, wow.
In England, of all places, I know. And it was incredibly rewarding. My client was really nice with the child. I mean, it took us some time, and
Yeah.
we didn't know where he was, but felt I learned so much off that case,
Yes.
in terms of what do we do and what can we do, and the powers that the High Court has. And from there, I realised that actually this is where I wanted to go.
Mm.
And form a career out of this. And from there, did lots of research, and became accredited very quickly, because you need to be accredited by the Law Society or Resolution here to
Mm.
have the specialism, um,
Ah, yeah.
in order to be on the panels to receive the work. And it is incredibly niche.
It
I mean,
is.
I've
Yeah.
learned by chance, and that's been great for me. I've learned on the job, but it is incredibly niche.
Mm. Wow. And did you see that there was a gap in the field, like you wanted to fill a gap and many law firms weren't doing what you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, at that time, so there's a panel, the International Child Abduction and Contact Unit panel of lawyers who specialise in child abduction. And at that time, there would have been around 20 lawyers in the entire country,
Wow.
specialising in this area of law, predominantly in London. And at that time, I was working for a firm in Warwickshire in the Midlands, and there was no one else doing this area of law. So it was very much filling a gap in the market, definitely at that time. I mean, now we are one of, I believe, 49 law firms
Mm. Wow.
specialise in this area. And there are firms now across the regions, but definitely at that time, there was a gap that needed to be
Mm.
filled.
Amazing. And the job scope that you do, I mean, it's pretty heavy going, emotionally draining. Does it get to you at times? How do you counter that if it does get to you?
I mean, it's a position of responsibility, and I see my role as I am here to help people solve their
Yeah.
conflict, help people get a resolution. I mean, it's very intense. The stakes are high because
Yeah.
these are children, and they are valuable.
Mm.
But I think that you have to have something outside of work, to keep you grounded, whether it's a hobby, whether it's an interest, somewhere where you can just switch off, um,
Mm.
because of how intense and how stressful it can be.
So what do you do outside work? Do you do anything fun?
I do. I love body combat, which is
Do you? Oh, wow,
I
that's
do.
intense.
I know it is. It's a martial arts inspired workout for anybody
Yeah.
who doesn't know what that is, but I would happily do that 3, 4 times a week,
Oh my
in
goodness.
terms of stress
Wow.
release and keeping fit.
Yeah, I think I tried it once 11 years ago and never again because it was so intense. Is that where you have to do you use weights in the workout or is it
No,
more
no, no. It's
okay,
boxing. It's basically
boxing?
boxing.
Oh wow.
Yes,
That's a lot of
yes,
effort. But good to box out the emotions when there's all
exactly.
yeah, oh that's great. But we talk about child abduction, but people might not really know what child abduction involves. So can you maybe just touch on what is actually child abduction?
Yes. So, child abduction is where one parent will wrongfully remove or retain a child. So, wrongfully remove is where they remove a child without the other parent's consent. So, generally speaking, if you are named on the birth certificate, if you are married, you will both share parental responsibility, which means that you have the same rights, duties, decision making powers in respect of your child. So things like determining where they will live, which country they will live in, whether they should have medical treatment, which school they should go to, all those decisions, both parents should be consulted, informed, and give consent. So a wrongful removal is where one parent will simply remove a child to another jurisdiction, to another country, without the other parent's consent. The other type of abduction is a retention, is where one parent might consent to the other parent going on a short holiday for 2 weeks to another country, But once that parent gets to that country, they then say, well, actually, I don't want to come back. And that is then a wrongful retention after a period of holiday. So it is the movement of children by parents. It is a criminal offence as well. But in terms of what I deal with specifically, it's the family law, civil side of it, where parents cross borders with children.
So Kim, COVID brought in a lot of changes for hearings, and did it impact cases in any way for you?
Yeah, there was a lot of uncertainty when COVID hit, because the courts closed down physically, and at that time we were all physically attending court, and hearings were taking place in person. So COVID brought a lot of uncertainty and delay. So ordinarily, a Hague Convention child abduction, so where two countries have signed up to the Hague Convention and there's been an abduction between those countries, just for example, if there was an abduction from France into England, that's a Hague Convention abduction. Those abductions are supposed to be dealt with within 6 weeks. Wow. From start to finish. So cases were taking a lot longer because of the uncertainty, and also because we were all getting COVID. Judges were getting COVID, advocates were getting COVID, clients were getting COVID. So there was a lot of uncertainty and more delay, but the court then put measures in place for us to be able to have remote hearings in the same way that we are speaking now. And when remote hearings came in, determinations were being made, return orders were being made, maybe not enforced until it was deemed safe, and people could travel and people could fly back. So initially there was delay, but actually as a result of COVID, it's opened up remote hearings. So cases can be heard much quicker, there can be more listings. But there is unfortunately a huge backlog of cases as a result of COVID, and it's going to take the court some time to catch up with that.
What are the stats, Kim, with child abduction? Is it on the rise?
Well, it was, but we've had a lot of changes in England. So, historically, so if we look at maybe 2014, there would have been around 275 incoming cases of abduction, so children being removed and brought to England, and around 170 outgoing, where children were being removed from here to another country. And these statistics, again, are Hague Convention statistics. So these are countries that signed the Hague Convention, and this doesn't include other abductions to countries who aren't signatory, like India, Pakistan. So that would have been around 2014. And if we skip to like 2022, there's been a massive drop to 160 incoming cases. But there's been more outgoing cases. There's been 182 in 2022. But in between that period, we've had Brexit. So that has had an impact because we're not part of the European Union in terms of movement of people. And we've had COVID. So that's had a knock-on effect as well. It's difficult to say whether we've had more or less, because my practice area is based on child abduction. So this is predominantly what I do. But we are becoming a small world. People are moving, people are settling abroad. I mean, I frequently advise people on when they're in a relationship and they want to relocate abroad with their partner or their wife or their husband, but they also want to know, well, what happens if it doesn't work out? And what's the position then? So I'm seeing an interesting flux of people who are exploring options to relocate abroad consensually, but wanting to know what their options are. And I think that is because we're becoming a smaller world. There are greater opportunities for people to work wherever they want and remotely.
Yes, absolutely. It's so true. But just like switching a little bit of in terms of like gears to common myths, you know, that you hear all kinds of myths when it comes to child abduction, but maybe not myths, but what are the dangers of child abduction?
I think in terms of personal relationships, what I understand and what I see frequently is that you think you really know someone, you live with them, you formed a life with them, you've had children with them,
Yeah.
They're your companion. But actually what I see is that actually everyone needs to be a little bit cautious, because you may not actually really know that person and what they're thinking and what their intentions are. And when you're in a loving relationship, obviously you trust one another, but people can be quite unpredictable. And I see that in my practice on a daily basis, even the ones that you think you know very well.
Mm. Yeah. That's 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 sad, isn't it? But it is the
It
harsh
is.
reality.
It
Uh,
is. It is incredibly sad. I agree with you, but it is also the reality of
yeah.
life.
Yeah. And I guess another thing that, like, the danger of a child being abducted is the broken down relationship between the parent and child. Because people have this idea that the child is actually safe in the hands of the parent who's taking them. I mean, there's this idea that, that maybe there's some difficult situation or like domestic violence and they're fleeing. Well, I guess that's an exceptional situation, but sometimes it can be that the parent that's abducting them is actually the abuser. Well, is that what you see more, or I guess it's a combination of both,
I'd
fact
say it's a
specific?
combination. I mean, we as professionals and even judges, no one knows the reality
Yeah,
of a family
yeah,
situation. We can only go by the evidence.
yes.
So we don't actually know what has happened, the full
Mm,
extent, I say, of what's happened in a person's relationship. But yes, the damage to children, um, on separation in terms of emotional harm by virtue of the separation itself,
yeah.
people need to be mindful of that even in amicable separations, there will be an impact on children. And yes, you are right that there is also a growing trend of parents who feel that they're not being heard in the courts if they're making allegations and they're not being found to be true, that they are taking the law into their own hands and removing children. And in those circumstances as well, the impact on children in terms of being abducted in those circumstances whilst they're living here because something's not going their parents' way and being taken away from everything that they know
Mm,
and the other parent, um, can be quite harmful.
yeah, I can imagine. That's and so how do you get psychologists and experts in to give a report in these type of situations?
Depending on the circumstances of the case, I mean, it's rare in the Hague Convention cases, but it depends on what defences a respondent is running.
Mm,
In non-Hague cases, again, it depends on what the issues are. I mean, we see psychologists a lot in cases where there have been allegations of domestic abuse and there needs to be a risk assessment of the perpetrator where findings have been made. In private law proceedings, um, and it can be in those types of cases where an abduction can then happen.
mm,
So yeah, we do use experts
mm.
depending, but it's fact specific.
Yeah. Yeah. So we spoke about the difficulties and dangers of child abduction. What then is the role of laws and regulations? We've got the country-specific laws and you've got Hague Convention. For starters, how does the left behind parent even begin with such a case?
So it all depends on which country they're in, because if the country is a signatory to the Hague Convention, then it's quite straightforward. They
Mm,
should be able to go to a designated central authority in their country who would be able to assist them in filling out the forms and starting the process to instruct a lawyer in the country where the child has been abducted to. With the non-Hague Convention countries, it's slightly different in terms of you need to find a solicitor who is an expert in child abduction in your home country and in the country where the child has been removed. I mean, if your child has been taken, for example, from India to England, then if you were in India, then you could look up the International Child Abduction Contact Unit's panel of specialist lawyers, and you would know that if you instructed one of those, you would be in safe hands. And you would be able to contact the lawyer and speak to them directly about your case and your circumstances. But equally, it's important to take advice in the country that you're in as well. Um, so yeah, so it's more streamlined if it's a country that's signatory to the Hague Convention.
yeah.
But if you're in a country that's not, then you do need to do your own research.
Mm. And Kim, is it possible that a child is never returned? Like, are there supports in place for the remaining parent?
It is possible that children are not returned, and in terms of support, your personal support network is the starting point. That's very important. What do you have around you in terms of your friends, your family, your doctor? But there are also charities. So in England, we have Reunite and Global Arc, who are charities who specialise in supporting parents who are going through the process of child abduction. But it is very important to have that support in place, because it is an emotionally driven area of law.
Yeah, I can imagine. You'd need all the support you can get around you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, we shared a lot about child abduction today. What is the biggest piece of advice, Kim, that you can give to someone who wants to practice in the area that you're practicing, which is child law?
So I would say that it's really important that you have an understanding of all aspects of family law, because they all intertwine. So if you can get to experience in divorce, finances, public law and private law proceedings, before going into a niche area of law, you will have an understanding of every area of relationship breakdown, in terms of because even in children law, quite often there'll be divorce proceedings going on in the background.
Yes.
There'll be other things going on in the case that aren't necessarily directly relevant to what's going on in the children dispute, but are still important.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to have an understanding of everything before delving into a niche. And it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yes, I can imagine.
Yes, it's,
Mm,
as I've said before, it's highly emotionally driven. The
mm.
people that we work with are vulnerable. And I would say that we see pockets of society that not many people see. So strength in character, the ability to empathise and forge relationships is also really important.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, hats off to you, Kim, for doing what you do and really helping all the families that need the support and yeah, just fighting for those children that need to be returned or whatever the case may be. So for audience members, child abduction is a weighty topic to discuss. After all, it's about a child being taken away. As rare as such situations may seem, especially in our local context, it's still a topic worth knowing about. We hope this session was insightful and provided interesting perspectives to think about. Thank you, Kim, for sharing your valuable expertise. It was wonderful having you on the podcast. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon. Have a good new year, everyone, and here's to a great 2024. Bye.
Bye.